Good now, Frank.
Okay. Mayor Provenzano.
Thank you.
I am here.
Councillor Christian. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Here.
Councillor Dufour.
Here.
Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Here.
Councillor Hilsinger.
Here.
Councillor Shoemaker. Councillor Bruni.
Here.
Councillor Nero.
Here.
Councillor Gardy.
Yes, here.
Councillor Scott.
Here.
Councillor Paul Christian. And Councillor Shoemaker.
Okay. So when they beep in, we'll hear the beeps, but otherwise we can.
Matt Shoemaker.
Oh, Councillor Shoemaker is here.
Okay.
Okay, Madam Clerk, if you can proceed.
Under agenda item 1, I have a motion by councillors Gardy and Dufour resolved that the minutes of regular council meeting of April 6, 2020 be approved.
Okay, Councillor Bruni.
Yeah.
Councillor Christian. Councillor Nero.
Yes.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Four.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Yeah.
Councillor Dufour.
Yes.
Councillor Gardy.
Yes.
Councillor Hilsinger.
Yes.
Councillor Scott.
Four.
Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Yes.
We had Councillor Christian beep in. Did you beep in, Councillor Christian?
That's correct.
You're in favor of the minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Under agenda item 3, declaration of pecuniary interest, Councillor Shoemaker has declared a conflict with respect to agenda item 6.13 and the associated bylaw 2020-97 as the contractor is a client to the law firm.
Are there any other councillors with conflicts of interest? Hearing none, we can move on.
Under agenda item 4, I have a motion by Councillor Scott and Vezo-Allen resolved that the agenda for April 27, 2020 City Council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor, Councillor, you have the vote up on your screen. You can cast your ballot, please.
Councillor Scott?
And the vote's not on mine. Sorry, I'm in favor.
And Councillor Christian?
Yes.
Councillor Scott and Councillor Christian, did neither of you have the opportunity to vote electronically for the last two votes?
No.
Okay.
I'm struggling with my Wi-Fi here.
Okay.
I can see that they're not connected, but I was able to vote for them manually.
Okay. Okay.
I'm going to close out and try again.
Okay.
Yes, I am as well.
Okay. So you two do that, and we'll continue on. So, Madam Clerk, that brings us to Section 5.
That's correct. Under agenda item 5.1, day of mourning, there's a proclamation.
So I will read that proclamation. Whereas the National Day of Mourning is held annually on April 28th to commemorate workers who have been injured, killed, or suffered illness due to workplace-related hazards and incidents. Whereas the purpose of the Day of Mourning is to remember and honor those workers and to renew commitment to improve health and safety in the workplace. Whereas April 28th was chosen to be the National Day of Mourning as it coincides with the day in 1914 that the Workers' Compensation Act received third reading. Whereas the Canadian flag on Parliament Hill will fly at half-mast and workers and employers across Canada will observe this day by lighting candles, donning ribbons and black armbands, and observing moments of silence. Therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim April 28, 2020 as a day of mourning in the City of Sault Ste. Marie in recognition of workers killed, injured, or disabled on the job. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
And I understand that we're going to jump to regular first. So under agenda item 7.1.1, COVID-19 update and financial impacts.
Okay, so we will deal with the CAO's COVID-19 update first and all COVID-related reports and questions, and then we'll go to consent agenda. So, Mr. CAO, we're in your hands. For the folks watching at home, do you have a slide deck for this? You do. There's also a PowerPoint on our presentation that you can pull up if you like. Go ahead, Mr. CEO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor and members of council, we decided because there were several reports that have a COVID element to them that I would do a PowerPoint and just kind of address all of them together, and then we can deal with the reports individually. Under this agenda item and the two subsequent ones, we'll deal with my pandemic update, the report by Mr. Bear and the report by Mr. Lamming. And then there are two others that I will mention that are part of the consent agenda. So I'll just begin by going through the PowerPoint presentation. As far as the community goes, we've been doing fairly well. While we do have positive cases in here, we have the lowest prevalence of positive cases in Northern Ontario. The community has responded very well to complying with both provincial orders and Algoma Public Health recommendations. And that certainly, I think, goes a long way to the fact that we do have the lowest prevalence. Community agencies are all working in a coordinated fashion to address COVID issues. We've seen great cooperation amongst all the related agencies, whether they be healthcare providers or social service providers in the community, and we have a number of methods of those working together, such as the Emergency Management Planning Committee, and that's all been going very well for us. For the corporation as a whole, our public closures of facilities continue. Services are still being provided through remote means and directly for essential services, such as in our public works area or our transit area. We've had to do a number of service adjustments so far with transit specifically. We've had to introduce complete new cleaning protocols for our transit fleet. At the landfill, we've had to put in security and put in measures to ensure that we have physical distancing while people still using the landfill. We've certainly had to add it to where we are providing direct services in our road maintenance and repair to ensure that staff are observing physical distancing and all appropriate measures to keep everyone safe. We've also added new services such as the community helpline, which is a 7-day-a-week operation that people can call into. If we turn to our capital projects, we are proceeding with our 2020 Capital Works program. That is something that all municipalities that I'm aware of are doing. That includes both projects that were started in 2019, like the Bay Street reconstruction and the St. George's McNabb project. So those are proceeding to the finish. As well, we have commenced tendering our 2020 approved capital works programs. One of those is before you tonight. Future projects that we've approved in a stepwise fashion, but still haven't reached a final approval yet, such as the Twin Pad Arena. We are preparing those for anticipated stimulus funding once we come out of the pandemic. We've been given information by both levels of government that they will be looking to find a way to help the economy restart once we are able to emerge from a community health focus. And we intend to be ready with those projects so that Sault Ste. Marie can get its fair share of provincial and federal government funding. If we look to our staff implications, part of which I reported on at the last meeting, with staff, we've had to have layoffs of our part-time and casual staff. Most of those are related to the closure of our recreational facilities, as well as things like school crossing guards. We have redeployed staff to other services, such as the previously mentioned community helpline, to the increased transit vehicle cleaning that we are doing, and we have other project work, for instance, at the GFL Memorial Gardens, where Sault Area Hospitals is building an off-site medical center. At this time, we are still working through all the details, but we do expect that summer student employment will be impacted. But we don't know the full extent of that, and part of that will depend on how long the measures for the pandemic occur, such as the closure of sports fields and recreational facilities. For the measurable financial impacts, as my report notes to council, we do have some measurable financial impacts right now. We have foregone revenue from transit fares and from the rental and programs associated with our closed facilities of a little over $1 million, which is projected to the end of May. So the projected loss in revenue to the end of May from those sources is $1,040,000. Associated with that, there are cost savings achieved as well by not offering those things of about $375,000. So that gives you a net impact to the end of May of $664,000 in change. As I note in the report, there are a number of other areas that we are still refining the information for. Staff have been gathering as much information as they can, but it's still being worked through for our finance staff to be tested and to be sorted out as to exactly how it affects the budget. To note to you some of those areas that have either increased expenses or decreased revenue that we're looking at. We're certainly looking at our increased operational expenses that we have to employ, either increased cleaning or physical distancing measures. We note we just received, after this report was prepared, casino revenue. The casino is closed, so that will definitely impact revenue. The impact for the first quarter was about $50,000 less than what we usually see in the first quarter. We will expect a decreased revenue in the municipal accommodation tax, obviously decreased investment income, and we are assuming we will see decreased interest on taxes receivable because of the measures council has made already and those that are recommended tonight. By the same token, we will also see decreased expenses. We have paused our staff recruitment, except for any positions that are considered absolutely essential. We expect that there will be reduced summer student employment, but we will have to report back to you further at the next meeting. Reduced fuel expenses. As you've all seen, fuel has become less expensive, and so we are experiencing savings in that area. We're experiencing savings in reduced employee benefit expenses and other operational items such as staff travel, electricity expenses, and supplies. Your finance staff is working through tracking all of those as well as other staff, and we will have a more fulsome report to you in May that will be tied together with our first quarter financial report. As noted on the agenda, there are additional reports to give you further information. Mr. Ver has a report on what we've been doing in business support during COVID-19. While our focus continues to be community health, we know that we will have to turn to the financial health of the community in short order, and so we are certainly trying to be as prepared as possible for that outcome. There's also a report by Mr. Lamming on just lease agreement suspension. Those outside entities that have leases with us at our recreational facilities, obviously we need to suspend the details of those leases until those facilities are able to open again. The CFO treasurer has two reports on which have COVID implications. One is the year-end financial report that you'll deal with in consent, and that has a recommendation that notwithstanding the surplus policy, that the year-end surplus of approximately $419,000 be allocated to the tax stabilization reserve. As well, she has the reports on for the 2020 tax rates to allow final tax billing. And in that, you'll note that there is a recommendation that the penalty interest provisions be at 0% for now and into the future until council decides at a later date when to lift that and reinstitute our usual interest provisions. That's the end of the presentation. We can deal with my report initially, and then we can move on to the next two under the regular item, which are Mr. Ver's report and Mr. Lamming's.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to focus our questions on the CEO's report, and then, as he's indicated, we'll move on to Mr. Ver's report next, and then Mr. Lamming's report. I have a list here of people that have questions. Right now, I just have Councillor Hollingsworth and Councillor Shoemaker. So if anybody else wants to get on the list, send me a text while they're asking. We'll start with Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Malcolm. First of all, I want to say the report, in my opinion, has assured me a great deal that you and your team are definitely being proactive, definitely on top of these very important issues. So I thought the report was well written, but I do have two quick questions for you. I'm glad to see that you're talking about the capital project, because for the last two council meetings, I kept asking about that. And I'm glad that you mentioned about the non-capital projects as well, such as, you talked about the twin pad quickly. So again, that reassures me that you both, your team, are definitely on it. My question really goes to, in your report, you mentioned that there's different areas that are going to be preparing themselves for the, when we go hopefully back to some normal business, for the onslaught, for the busyness. You mentioned in your report that planning, building, engineering, as examples, are working behind the scenes to help with when it becomes busy. Can you can you emphasize exactly how they're preparing? For example, building permits will be very important to our community. Your department is going to be very busy going through those. Can you touch on how your team's getting ready?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. Certainly in the building division, they are continuing to take in information and to discuss things, whether through email or over the phone, with clients and with builders and developers. They are issuing building permits for essential work right now and some other building permits. Obviously, those permits have the caveats that the people themselves have to abide by provincial orders. And sometimes that may mean they need to get their own legal advice as to the work they intend, whether it meets the test of essential under the provincial orders. In areas where people aren't ready to proceed yet, but will be ready to proceed once we emerge from our current conditions, they are trying to get those background things prepared so that they are able to issue permits on an expedited basis once we emerge from our current condition.
Okay. One question just leading up to those comments. So if I understand correctly, if you are in the construction business and you have blueprints ready, did I hear there's like a queue or there's a drop-off area? Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. Certainly for any of our services, if people are wondering how to get in touch with us, we do have that listed on our website, the services that are being offered and the contact modes, whether that be telephone or email, that people are able to get in touch with staff. Staff are still working on these things. If there is the rare instance that we do need to interact with someone face-to-face, we will arrange that on an appointment basis. It still does happen from time to time, and so we manage it that way, of course observing the proper protocols for physical distancing and any sanitation requirements.
Okay, thank you for that. And two other questions. Just to reconfirm on a different note, we as a city, we as a municipality do not run any long-term homes. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, it sounds like you and your team will continue on looking at finding cost-saving solutions. So as we start looking at a financial impact, you'll come back probably with more financial suggestions on how we can control our expenses, how we can basically mitigate any of these deficits. Correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, yes, we will continue to provide you with more detailed information as it becomes available. I only caution to you that as all municipalities have found, there's still a lot of unknowns to this, and we're still working our way through them.
Okay, thank you. And as you mentioned, provincially, federally, hopefully those stimulus will come through to help us with other projects. Thank you again. That was a well-written report.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the CAO. I know you said you'll suss out some details in a May report on summer students, but with the declining economic fortunes kind of across the board in Canada, it's going to be harder for everybody to find employment, including students, and they gain valuable experience from working at the city. I know as a former summer student. Is there any way to maintain the complement? Is there any way that we can hire, the same number back? Are all those options going to be looked at? I know that was about 3 questions, but...
Not a problem. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. We are looking in great detail at what we need with summer students. There's a few things we need to look at. One, we know we will need summer students to some degree because we do depend on them for operations. And those operations will continue, and we have to continue to provide them, and the only way we can provide them is through the use of summer students. That being said, we do have areas that we simply aren't offering services right now, and those would include our recreational facilities that are closed, as well as our outdoor sports fields. When we deal with something like outdoor sports fields, if they're not being used for sports, and right now they can't be due to provincial order, we still have to do a certain level of maintenance on them to preserve the asset. So we still have to do a certain amount of spring repair, and we have to maintain the grass and other things on them, essentially to the level of a passive park. But we don't need to do sport field lining, and we don't need to cut the grass as often as you need to do on a sports field. What may happen is we may get to a point, hopefully sometime this summer, where the leagues are able to start up again and they are able to utilize those fields. Once we get to those points and see them coming, we probably will be able to hire the students that normally would have provided that level of service back. It's just that we will hire them at a later date and for a shorter term than we can. The other area, of course, aside from sports fields, we do have students for a specific event and programming. And if we're not able to provide that because facilities are closed and programming isn't there, then it's difficult to hire the same number that you had in a previous year.
Okay. No, that's helpful. I guess can we get an assurance, maybe in the future report, maybe now verbally, that to the greatest degree possible, as many summer students as we can hire to ensure that there are those opportunities out there will be hired this year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we're certainly cognizant of the importance of summer employment for summer students, and we will endeavor to do what we can, given a lot of issues that we need to balance. We will be able to provide some more detail on that at upcoming council meetings.
Yeah, I think a regular update on that would be appreciated. So whenever you've got those and there's a council meeting, that update would be appreciated. With respect to kind of a bit of an irritant I've been hearing from folks, it's a minor issue, but because everyone's home so much more, the garbage is accumulating much more quickly than it does when you're at work for a third of the day. So I've had folks wondering if it's possible to double the waste capacity that can be disposed of on the weekly basis at curbside.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I'll take a stab at this, but I will also refer it after to Mr. Girardi, our Deputy CEO of Public Works and Engineering. For doubling curbside waste limits, that's difficult for us with our current mode of collecting that waste. And I'll let Mr. Girardi answer that in more detail. We're certainly cognizant that more waste is being produced, but we also have gone to a bin system which holds more than just the 2 bags or 2 containers that we had before. I will turn it over to Mr. Girardi at this point for further comment.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, and to add on to what the CAO has just stated, right now we do, our green bins actually hold more than a 2-bag limit. You can fill them completely to the top. We run an automated program, and the automated program certainly is very useful during these times, especially with COVID, because of the health and safety concerns of actually handling bags of people who may have been in contact or had contact with COVID-19. So there are other municipalities right now who are having issues, as a matter of fact, and work stoppages because their employees do not want to be able to pick up that garbage. So it's my opinion, but I would prefer that we just stick to the green bins and not increase it.
Okay, with respect to the capacity of them, what is an acceptable, loading up of it? I mean, as long as the lid closes, is that going to be picked up?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, yes, as long as the lid closes, it will be picked up.
Sorry, let me ask this. Maybe this will give us some clarity. Larry, have your teams been refusing any garbage, like over the last couple of weeks, as people have had more of it?
To you, Mr. Mayor, we have not refused any garbage, as far as I've been aware. But again, we have been picking up roadside. We've been just doing automation.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Shoemaker, go ahead.
No, that clarifies it. Okay, so I think there's a weight limit currently, but I guess what you're saying is it isn't being strictly adhered to for the time being during this crisis. As long as it fits within the bin, it'll be picked up for the most part.
That's correct.
I think, yeah, that's correct, Councillor Shoemaker.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
That was it on that report. Thank you.
Okay, on the CEO's report, I have Councillor Bruni next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank Mr. White for the report. I'd like to talk about the foregone revenue. Is it possible, say for next council, would we be able to get what the impact is for the user fee revenue that we're losing? And I'll give you an example. Say transit, the revenue is like 2.6 million, and the cemetery operations it's $1 million. At GFL Memorial Gardens, the revenue was 1.7 million. Would we be able to get a list of the basically lost revenue from these departments or these branches, if you want to call them?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, yes, we'll be able to give you that level of detail.
At next council meeting?
Yes.
Okay, I thank you. And to go back to the part-time and the casual, I just want to confirm regarding the layoffs that occurred. The part-time employees were people that would work at the Memorial Gardens, the Meekin Center, John Rhodes, etc., Historical Board, and casual. The number is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 180 part-time and casual workers that are laid off presently.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, I believe the exact number was 181 records of employment were issued.
Right. And my final question regarding the hotline. How many people work at the hotline? It's 7 days a week. I know someone tried calling and they said the line was busy. So I'm just, I told them to call back. But how many people work at the community hotline?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, I believe during Mondays to Fridays, we try and staff it with approximately 4, maybe 5 staff. And on weekends, it's a lesser number. usually about 2, because we do see a reduction in calls on weekends.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Councillor Dufour.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is for CAO White. For the future upcoming report in May, will we be able to be given some examples of capital projects that could be deferred and have a cost-benefit analysis of what the implications of that would be?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour. If council wishes that level of detail, we can provide it. At this time, I can tell you that I'm unaware of any municipality that's looking to defer capital projects.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Lisa Vezoallen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to CEO White. Thanks, Malcolm, for the report. I just wanted to, I have been getting inquiries from constituents concerned about going forward with capital projects. My question mainly is in terms of funding that is already in place. If you could elaborate on, especially in terms of the downtown plaza, what funding is already in place to go forward with this project?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezoallen, the Downtown Plaza project is an example of a project that the final costs for it haven't been determined yet. It's still in an initial design phase. The initial design phase will have a degree of public input into it before final design is chosen and final cost estimates are prepared. So that would be a project where we haven't totally determined what the level of funding will be needed. And because of that, it's early for me to tell you what kind of funding would be required. When I talk about capital projects, there is a list of capital projects that council approved for 2020, essentially road and sewer projects with some aqueduct work, as well as we have some road work being continued on from last year to be finished. The more specialized projects, such as the Plaza project or potentially the Twin Pad Arena project, those are items that are still out there and still have council decision points ahead of them before they would proceed. And those are projects which we would come back to you and lay out all the details about before you would approve them or not.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification as to, and I know that Bay Street is included in projects that will get completed this year, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Okay, I have nobody else on this list. If there are no other questions of the CEO and his report, we can move to report 7.1.2, business support during COVID-19. Everybody's got Mr. Vere's report. Mr. Vere, are you on the line available for questions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Vere on 7.1.2?
Yes.
Councillor Shoemaker?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation that the report be accepted, does that prevent us at all from taking action on this? If in 2 weeks we decide that we do want to use the EDF, I recognize that staff's recommendation at this point is not to go forward with that. I'm not so sure that we shouldn't go forward with it at some point. I just want to be sure that if council wants to move forward with using the EDF at some point, we are free to do so by just bringing a motion forward.
Yeah, Councillor Shoemaker, I'll answer that question and then staff can offer its opinion. In my opinion, as the head of council, I do not believe accepting this report as information, and it's just, that's what you're doing today, you're accepting it as information. It prohibits or precludes council from making a decision to move ahead and use the EDF in that way when the picture is clear to us on the supports available for business. So I don't personally believe it prohibits that. I think you're wide open to bring a motion in the future if that's what you'd like to do, and council can decide to do that if that's what it would like to do. And I think this today, all you're doing is receiving staff's report as information, which expresses their perspective and opinion, but it doesn't bind us as a body. Mr. CEO, did you have the same opinion?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, yes, the report is on for your information only today. It does lay out staff's recommendation or opinions on a few matters, but that does not preclude council from moving in a certain direction as time goes on.
Okay, thanks. That's yeah. I think it's a bit early to, personally, I think it's a bit early to make the determination that we shouldn't use it, so I want my option open to be able to do that if it proves to be necessary. Thank you.
I agree with that, Councillor Shoemaker. Any other comments on Councillor Bear's report?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
just a point of procedure, if I could interrupt. We've had a note passed to us by the Shaw broadcaster that they would like councillors to speak up and speak closer to their device for Shaw to pick it up for the broadcast.
Okay. So we will move on to 7.1.3.
Mr. Mayor, could I read the motion for 7.
Oh, sure.
Okay. I've got 7.1.1, which is a motion by Councillor Scott and Dufour reserved that the report of the CAO dated April 27, 2020 concerning COVID-19 update and financial impacts be received as information, and that vote is open.
Councillors, if you can cast your vote, please.
Councillor Christian? And under Agenda 7.1.2, a motion by Councillor Scott and Vezo Allen resolved that the report of the Deputy CAO Community Development and Enterprise Services dated April 27, 2020 concerning business support during COVID-19 outbreak be received as information.
Council, if you can vote on that, please.
Councillor Christian?
4.
That carries unanimously. And under agenda item 7.1.3, did you want to have your discussion and then I'll read the motion?
No, go ahead. You can just you could read the motion and we'll
It's a motion by Councillors Gardy and Vezo Allen resolved that the report of the Director of Community Services dated April 27, 2020 concerning lease agreements at the John Rhodes Community Centre be received and that Council approve the suspension of 4 lease agreements due to the COVID-19 pandemic effective March 16, 2020.
Okay, so Council, do you have any questions related to this report? I believe Mr. Lamming's on the line if you do.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I am.
Councillor Hollingsworth, I just have one.
Go ahead, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Okay. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Lemon. Just to confirm, the spinal cord injury who have an office there at John Rhodes, again, they are not part of this list because they don't pay rent at this point or leasing. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else on that item? Hearing none, if you can please vote on accepting that report.
Nothing is coming up on my screen. This is Councillor Christian.
So, Councillor Christian, can you just indicate your support?
Yes,
for
I
this?
support. I support.
Okay. Very good.
That passes unanimously.
Okay, we will move on to consent agenda then, I believe, Madam Clerk.
That's correct.
Okay, we are on the consent agenda. Councillors, do you have any matters on consent you'd like to canvass?
I do, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Shoemaker, go ahead. Which number? Number?
6.2.
6.2.
Surplus policy.
Go ahead.
At the last meeting, we discussed the possibility, and obviously today we discussed using the community development fund to support local business, but that's $500,000-600,000. We've got the tax stabilization fund as well, which I think is at $2 million or so. If council so chose in the future, would that money be available to use to, prop up business, if I could put it that way, in a kind of colloquial term, in order to stabilize our tax base in the Soo, if we determined it was necessary to do that?
So I think what you're trying to determine, Councilor Shoemaker, is what are the restrictions maybe on the use of those funds?
Yeah.
If any. Okay. Mr. White, we'll start with you, and then we can move to the city's treasurer if she has anything to add on it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I will delegate this to the CFO treasurer, but I'll just note that the tax stabilization fund is a fund that needs to be used for the corporate impacts of something like this.
Michelle, can you please?
Yep.
Yep.
I didn't know it was my turn. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. Yes, the tax stabilization reserve, through the reserve policy that was approved by council, it has a specific use, which is to mitigate any tax increases in 1 year. But it also has a stipulation that if it's used to mitigate it, there also has to be a plan to manage it going forward, and that the tax stabilization reserve can't be used on an ongoing basis to reduce the tax levy. Of course, as it's council's right and to change any use of a reserve, and at any time they can put a motion forward to require that change in the reserve policy.
Right, so there's no provincially legislated restrictions on how we can use it. I mean, if we wanted to, we could just change policies to make those funds available to stabilize our tax base, so to speak.
If that's council's desire, yes, it can be done.
I think one of the things we'd have to be mindful of, Councillor Shoemaker, is the anti-bonusing provisions in the Municipal Act. Beyond that, I don't know if there's really any other statutory limitation.
Okay, so as long as we did it in a broad-based and fair manner, generally speaking, there aren't any restrictions on the use of the funds from higher levels of government.
I'm hearing no.
No.
Okay, that was my only question on that agenda.
Okay, so I have a list going on this agenda, 6.2. So next on 6.2, we have Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my understanding is that the suggestion is we use the surplus from this year in tax stabilization. My question to Michelle is, do we have this surplus available from other years? And in theory, if required, could we take any outstanding amounts from previous years and apply it to next year's taxes? Hypothetically speaking, is there anything stopping us from doing that?
Michelle?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, the surpluses from previous years, aside from the one that we're speaking about for 2019, have all been allocated based on the surplus policy. So 40% went to tax stabilization, 30% to capital, and 30% to long-term debt. So the only amount that's available right now is the current balance under the tax stabilization, which is if we approve tonight to add the 400 and some thousand of 2019 surplus to it, it'll be close to $2.9 million available to help mitigate any potential deficits that may be incurred in 2020 due to COVID.
So yes, so just to wrap it again, so there were funds in the tax stabilization prior to this that are available, and you say the amount is 2.9, I think you said, if we needed it.
If we add this surplus fully to that, it will be 2.9.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's my only question.
And I think for the purpose of people listening at home, we can't say watching anymore, but listening at home, kind of one of the important takeaways from the CFO's report is that if we run a deficit this year, and based on the information that staff is giving to us, we are at risk of running a deficit because of COVID. We would have to make that up in next year's budget. Having these monies available to us really is very helpful, because the only other way to make it up in next year's budget, if you can't find it in cutting services, is in adding it to the levy, right? So if you can't decrease your cost, you're adding it to the levy. And we don't want to add to the levy next year in any substantial way, because we're trying to minimize the cost of this crisis to people. So it's helpful to have the money there to defray that potential additional levy charge.
For sure. Clarification on that answer.
Sure. Well, I think that's more of a comment for me than an answer. Yeah, but go ahead.
If we add, like if we run a deficit, is there not the option of adding it to our debt and amortizing it over a number of years rather than just adding it to the tax levy next year? All of it?
Could you, we'll let the treasurer answer that question.
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, no. It has to be dealt with usually by adding it to the next year's budget as a tax levy increase. We can't borrow to balance our budget.
I had the same feeling you did, Councillor Shoemaker. I didn't understand why that was the case, but apparently it is. Yeah. Okay, any other questions for the CFO? I have then, sorry, I do have a list here. I have Councillor Hollingsworth again. Councillor Hollingsworth? So, I don't know where Councillor Hollingsworth is, so we'll move on. That is it then for 6.2. Councillor Shoemaker, we had started with you. Do you have anything else in the consent agenda?
Yes, 6.3.
6.3. So 2020 tax rates.
Yes. So the recommendation, if I'm reading it correctly, is just that we suspend interest kind of indefinitely on taxes that become due. Is that correct, Ms. Schell?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, it actually only goes to December 31st. In the bylaw, you'll see that any arrears going forward, once we reach into 2021, we'll go back to the other interest rate. So council will have to look at when we pass the interim bylaw at the beginning of January of 2021, whether it continues on at that point, or if they so choose to go beyond the motion that goes to August 31st, I think, for tonight, there'll have to be another motion to stop it. But it'll just keep going until December 31st.
Right. I guess what I'm getting at is the motion that I've got on the agenda to go to August 5th is somewhat duplicative of what your recommendation is. Is that not the case?
I wouldn't say so. All the bylaw does is set it administratively, so council doesn't have to keep going back and changing the bylaw all the time. So right now we'll go to August 5th for that motion, and then we'll have to revisit it at that time again to see if the bylaw needs to be changed back.
Okay. Well, that works. Okay. We'll leave it at that.
Well, it's so just so I understand. So we're setting it at zero. We're setting it at zero until we change it away from zero. Like, you're not going to change it away from zero come August 5th, or is that what staff's intention is? It's at zero.
It's at zero. To you, Mr. Mayor, it's at zero until such time that council deems it not to be zero.
Okay, so then how would the August 5th date be relevant then?
If council wants to set it to August 5th at this time, and then revisit it at August 5th, it would just be a point in time to review.
But if the August 5th date wasn't there, if it doesn't exist,
it's zero.
Go to December 31st, right?
That's right.
Or earlier if that happens to be the
okay.
case, if thinking positive.
Right. So I think the best way forward is actually for me to withdraw my 8.1 motion, because that potentially moves the date up to August 5th, or at least gives the opportunity for that issue to be raised on August 5th, whereas otherwise, if we want to change the date, we could just bring a motion forward at any time. I
would agree with that, Councillor Shoemaker. So without if your motion goes ahead, we will be discussing it on August 5th and potentially putting it back in place at that point or not. If your motion doesn't go ahead, someone will have to bring a motion to change the bylaw from 0% to a different percent. Do you agree with that, Councillor, Mr. CAO? Am I stating that correctly?
Yes, you are, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, in that case, I think it's best to withdraw 8.1.
Okay, we'll consider that withdrawn. So I have no one left on the list for 6.3. Does anybody else want to speak to 6.3 before I go back to Councillor Hollingsworth, who is on the line again? Okay. Hearing from no one, Councillor Hollingsworth, you had a question about 6.2. We lost you for a second there. Okay.
Hello?
So,
Sorry,
yeah.
6.3. I also have a question on 6.3 at Councillor Hollingsworth. I'm having technical difficulties.
Okay, start with 6.2 and then we'll go to 6.3.
Okay. Before my technical difficulties, I heard with regards to balancing and deficit. So I just want clarification. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Shelley Shell. It's my understanding that the Ontario municipalities must maintain a balanced budget. Any deficits incurred must be added to the next fiscal year. It's my belief, and it's also my belief that there's no talk at this time at the provincial level that this particular policy provincially will be softened for the next year or 2 years. Is that correct?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, we have heard nothing for the province of Ontario to allow a deficit going forward.
Okay. And my other question on 6.2, I heard also when I was being cut off about the surplus on one particular area, but Shelley Shell, can we take reserves from surpluses from other reserves and use them for a different use? Is that possible?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, as I had stated, I think when you were offline, it's Council's prerogative to change the use of any reserve and change the reserve policy to reflect claims.
Okay. Sorry about my technology being off. That's it for that.
Okay, and that's it for 6.3 then, Sandra, also?
No, one quick 6.3.
Okay, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor, to Mr. White. Is it possible sometime in the future that staff can look at different strategies to basically report back to us what type of strategies you're doing around municipal growth sometime in the future, if you can consider doing a report, since growth is important to our revenue and so forth.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, I'm sure that issue will be canvassed in the future.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Councillor Shoemaker, back to you. Anything else in the consent agenda?
No, thank you.
Okay, councillors, any other councillors with matters in the consent agenda? Madam Clerk, can you read the consent motion, please?
I have a motion by Councillors Gardy and Vezo-Allen. Resolved that all items listed under date April 27, 2020, agenda item 6, consent agenda, be approved as recommended.
Okay, you have the vote on your computers, council. If you can cast your vote, please.
Councillor Christian?
4.
That passes unanimously.
Okay.
And
So that would bring us to 8.2 because 8.1 has been withdrawn. Madam Clerk, if you could read the motion on 8.2, then I'll give Councillor Nero a chance to comment on it.
I have a motion by Councillors Nero and Shoemaker, whereas the 2019 novel coronavirus, COVID-19, has impacted people all over the world, including our own community of Sault Ste. Marie, and whereas the province has enacted a declaration of emergency to help contain the spread of COVID-19, and whereas as a result of the declaration, many businesses were required to close, allowing only essential businesses to remain open, and whereas the closing of all but essential business has resulted in significant unemployment and has caused significant financial difficulty for both employers and employees, and whereas over the last several weeks, the federal and provincial governments have rolled out numerous support programs for both employers and employees, and whereas it is the desire of the Sault Ste. Marie City Council to find ways in which we can help and support those in need during these difficult times of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, therefore, be it resolved that City Council suspend the collection of the City of Sault Ste. Marie sewer surcharge for the months of April and May 2020. Further, be it resolved that should the declaration of emergency carry on for an extended amount of time, that Council revisit the collection of the sewer surcharge at that time.
Okay, so Councillor Nero, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, as the motion states, I really do believe that this council wants to do something to help and support those in need during this COVID-19 pandemic. And when we look at what we can do, I mean, we have to be mindful that we do it in a way that doesn't impact our budget for 2020. And, you know, as I said last meeting, as you just said a few moments ago, we have to keep in mind that although the province and the provincial and the federal governments can run deficits, we can't. So if we spend money that impacts our budget for this year, that we don't have this year, we just have to make it up next year. And the only way we could make that up next year is by increasing taxes specifically for what we want to do this year. So we saw tonight from Mr. White's report that the net financial impact of COVID-19 projected to May 31st is already $664,387. And I'm sure that when Mr. White brings a more complete report in May, that number is going to increase. That's why I believe that the way we can help our community is by using our sewer surcharge account. It's not from our approved budget for 2020, although some money may be coming from that sewer surcharge account. The sewer surcharge account specifically was put in place to finance sewer infrastructure projects only. The money is not used for anything else but except those projects, of course, unless council decides to change that whenever they wish. It's for clarification, it's charged and collected on the monthly PUC bill on behalf of the city. The surcharge we used was 100% of the residential water bill, but in 2015, and Mr. Mayor, I think at your request at that time, we changed it to 62% for residential, and now 82% of the water bill is collected for non-residential. So it should also be noted that we pay a monthly collection or administrative fee to the PUC to bill that sewer surcharge on our behalf. Although they collect it on the PUC bill, it comes back to our account. So if council approves this motion tonight, I think, and I thank Mr. White for getting me these numbers, if we approve this motion tonight by using the 2019 actual numbers, we would be suspending the collection of some $1,067,000 for April and some $1,024,000 in May. Plus, of course, some administrative charges of $21,000 in fees that would be collected by the PUC to collect those fees for us. So that's about $2,091,000 that stays directly in the pockets of residents and businesses to help them get through these difficult times. In one of the reports we saw on our agenda tonight, we talked about assessment and the non-growth of assessment this year whatsoever. I mean, if we don't, the businesses have had help from the province and have help from the federal government up until now, to this point. There may be more coming, but I think we need to do our part as much as we can to make sure that these businesses start up again, because we don't want to lose that extra assessment that, you know, we're at zero assessment growth now. So I think we want to help in that matter. So I should also note that there's two major projects that are on our capital works and some smaller ones as well that we expect to spend from our sewer surcharge in the amount of $72 million by the year 2024. So seeing as that's the case, I think that if we suspend a couple of months right now to give some help to those in need, we have some time to recoup the lost revenue that we're giving up at this time. So those are my comments, Mr. Mayor, and I hope that we can support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Nero. Councillor Shoemaker, did you want to add anything?
Just, to reiterate Councillor Nero's point that it's kind of something very little that we can do. It's the little amount that we have the ability to do, I should say. I wish, of course, there was more that the city could do, but this is, like Councillor Nero said, a $2 million economic impact of money remaining in the community. So it's definitely an action I support, and I wish there were more things like along these lines that we could do, but we should take whatever actions we're able to.
Thanks. Just before we move on, there's someone not on mute who's moving around a whole lot or moving paper around a whole lot or making a bunch of noise. So if those that aren't speaking can make sure you're muted, it would be appreciated. Do we have any? So I have a list going here. Councillor Gardy, you have a question or comment on this?
A quick comment. I just wanted to commend Councillor Nero for bringing it forward. It's an innovative way that can make a real impact right away. Like Councillor Shoemaker said, there isn't a heck of a lot we could do right now, but this is something tangible that we can. So I commend both of them for their action on this. Thanks.
Any other comments on this motion? For my part, I was happy to work with Councillor Nero on it and Councillor Shoemaker. I think it's a worthwhile effort. We have to be sensitive to how long we're doing it for, because we do need to have these resources to invest in our infrastructure that's necessary, and we've got some big expenditures coming up. But for the month of April, for the month of May, when people are really going to be affected by this crisis, we can help immediately and put them in a position where they have to pay out a little less money. And the PUC, I talked to Rob Brewer at the PUC about this. It doesn't represent a significant administrative challenge to the PUC. They can make this adjustment pretty quickly. As we are all aware, the PUC bills retroactively, so we pass this resolution tonight. They'll know tonight, tomorrow. They'll make the change, and when people get their April bills and their May bills, they won't have to pay this cost. So it makes a difference in people's lives immediately, and I think it's worth doing, and I don't think there's much downside as long as we are sensitive to how long we're doing it for. So in that respect, I support the motion. It's all on your screens. If you could cast your vote, we can move on.
Councillor Christian?
In favor.
That passes unanimously.
Okay. That, with 8.1 pulled, that brings us to bylaws, I believe, Madam Clerk.
Yes, it does. I have a motion by Councillors Gardy and Vezo-Allen resolved that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda under date April 27, 2020, save and accept bylaw 2020-97 be approved.
All in favor? Oh, you can vote now, please. Thank you.
Councillor Christian?
For.
That passes unanimously. And bylaw 2020-97 is accepted due to Councillor Shoemaker's conflict. So I have a resolution by Councillors Gardy and Vezo-Allen resolved that bylaw 2020-97, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of the agreement between the City and Avery Construction Limited for the reconstruction of 6th Avenue from Wallace Terrace to Devon Road, contract 2020-1E, be passed in open council this 27th day of April 2020.
Council, you can vote. It's on your screens.
Councillor Christian?
For.
That passes unanimously with the exception of Councillor Shoemaker due to his conflict. And under agenda item 14, a motion by Councillors Scott and Dufour resolved that this council now adjourn.
All in favor?
For.
You can vote on your screens. Council Christian's in favor. Appreciate your time tonight, Council, and your cooperation. We are very hopeful that come May potentially late May, we will be able to be in the same place at the same time, and I certainly can tell you that I look forward to that.
Stay safe, everybody.